Okay, we can go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Am I allowed to feel this way at work? How to deal with emotions at work? I'm Demebi Igbuna. I'm the co-founder and CMO of Chezi. Before I pass it over to our wonderful presenters, I did just want to give an introduction to us as an organization. So Chezi is an end-to-end platform for employee resource groups. So our goal is to really centralize your ERGs, making it easy for all of your employees to participate, but also for people teams to get the data that they need. I will, after this call, probably send out more information about us if you're interested in exploring more, but this isn't really about us. This is more about you all and how we can help you, explore the benefits of feeling your feelings at work. Before we hop into the presentation, I do want to just remind everyone that this is being recorded. So I will send out this recording after the event. We also are going to do a Q&A for the last 10 to 15 minutes. So if you have any questions as they're going through the presentation, feel free to drop those in the chat. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Marshall, who is the CEO and co-founder of Source Wellness.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it and really appreciate you having us here today. So like she said, my name is Marshall. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Source Wellness. And at Source Wellness, we focus on educating organizations at the intersection of DEI and MW. So for those of you who may not know what the acronym stands for, it stands for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Mindfulness, and Wellness. And that's our unique approach in the DEI industry. So in all of the work we do, we make sure to combine aspects of DEI, mindfulness, and wellness, because over our 3 years of operating as an organization, we've seen how important they are when operating together and how it can really help people have more sustainability in their journey and make a more sustainable impact in their organization. So our mission is really to empower organizations to create inclusive cultures where employees can experience belonging, they can find greater purpose in their work, and they're able to drive positive change in organizational productivity and well-being. And before I hand it over to Nasia so that she can get started in this session, I'd just like to introduce her and provide some background. So Nasia is a licensed mental health counselor and a clinical therapist with an MA in counseling psychology from Boston College and over 2 decades of experience working in the field of mental health and human services. She has counseling experience across a wide range of settings, including corporations, educational institutions, healthcare institutions, and correctional facilities. Nasia was introduced to the principles and practices of mindfulness in 2007 through training such as mindfulness-based stress reduction and dialectical behavioral therapy, and has developed and facilitated mindfulness-based practices in individual sessions and therapeutic groups over many years. All the work that Nasia does is really to empower others through a whole person and trauma-informed approach. Then specifically for Source Wellness, we've been working with Nasia for almost 2 years now, and she was one of the primary people that helped us develop our DEIMW program, which is an 8-week course that teaches participants how to embody practices and mindsets around this crucial intersection of diversity, equity, inclusion, mindfulness, and wellness. So now I will pass it over to Nasia.
Thank you, Marshall. This is great. I'm happy to be here with everyone. Next slide, please. So there's some images with, things that are important to me or things that have contributed to my training. There's Octavia Butler. She's one of my favorite, authors, Black science fiction writer. There's me and my family, my son and my husband. There's some vegan cheesecake over there. I have Amazing Race on there. Just it feels a little bit more distinguished, really, but that really is to represent my love and appreciation for reality TV. So there's some other shows I can put up, but Amazing Race feels, appropriate. And I love amusement parks and I'll sit in the front of a roller coaster, that kind of thing. But so that's just a little bit about me. There's Isaac Asimov there as well. So I'm a big fan of science fiction, but let's move on to the next slide. Today's agenda. So we'll have 3 sections looking at emotional literacy, defining it, talking about ways to identify emotions, discussing the function of emotions. Section 2, why do I feel this way? Looking at overthinking and how it impacts the way we feel. Looking at toxic positivity, how that may show up for us, how it may impact how we show up at what can we do about, what we notice. Looking at self-compassion, different ways to check in that, are accessible. And also looking at this term around selective vulnerability. So we'll talk more about what that looks like. Next slide. Purpose and learning outcomes, to develop an awareness of our emotional experience and apply what we notice to better understand our needs. Practice mindfulness skills. So we'll do a little bit of that today. Have some opportunities for an experiential just practice. And looking at ways to safely pay attention to our emotions and manage what we notice in the present moment. Diversify our emotional profile by increasing our vocabulary to better understand what we feel. And we'll talk more about that throughout the session. Next slide, please. So session guidelines, looking at kind of a collective agreement, there may be some points that you endorse, some that you might have questions about, but this idea of assuming positive intent, suspending judgment about ideas that are different from our own, considering the potential impact of our words on others, honoring vulnerability, understanding is key, but agreement is optional. My pledge to you is to create a safe space where we can interact comfortably and express opinions, share information and answer questions with clarity, honor personal stories, provide tools to help facilitate your ongoing journey, and help you feel empowered to apply these insights in your daily life. Thank you. Next slide. Let's take a moment just to kind of check in, just noticing kind of how you're feeling right now. Where I am, it's 12:09 p.m. And so I'm feeling I'm feeling excited to be here. And I'm feeling a bit expectant, it's kind of, I have things that I'm looking forward to with all of you today. Next slide, please. So we're going to take a moment together to simply breathe. Participating in workshops or seminars, being on Zoom, whether we're a spectator or whether we are kind of leading or facilitating, they can have an impact on our stress response. And so this is an opportunity for us to kind of settle our stress response, allow us to kind of feel grounded in this moment. And we can move to the next slide and I'll tell you more about what this is going to look like. So it's a 4-7-8 breathing exercise, and I'm going to guide us through this. And this is an exercise that can help to lower our heart rate and just slow us down in general and put us in a position to engage and participate. And so you can get into a comfortable position. If you, there's always an invitation to close your eyes if that helps. You can feel free to turn off your camera, whatever works best for you. I'm gonna take a moment, gonna inhale, 2, 3, 4, and you'll hold your breath, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and breathe out slowly, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm going to do this for 2 more times. I just want to note that, you can go at whatever pace works for you. You don't need to hold your breath for 7 seconds if it feels like too much. So we're going to inhale, 2, 3, 4, and hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and breathe out slowly, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One more time. Let's inhale, 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. And you can feel free as we're going through this, if there's anything that you're noticing, or shifts or what have you, can feel free to add what you're noticing in the chat. What was that like for some of you to engage in a breathing exercise? Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Yeah. Sometimes, it can be calming, and sometimes we can be in our head and be worried about, okay, am I doing this right? And so being mindful of that too. Yeah, thank you, Jim. Glad to hear that. Yeah. So let's move on to the next slide. Thank you, Rance. So I wanted to go into this, giving ourselves the opportunity to approach this session with openness, and in the mindful kind of, in the lexicon around mindfulness, we often talk about kind of an attitude of having a beginner's mind. It gives us an opportunity to be free of expectations based on past experiences. This is an approach that we can use at work, if we're called into a meeting, if we need to have a tough conversation, kind of going into it with the experience of having a fresh perspective. Okay, and curiosity. And I would, encourage us to kind of find ways to kind of bring that approach even to this session today. Next slide. So, so we can go back to the slide right before this one. Just looking at mindfulness, looking at moment to moment, non-judgmental awareness, and it's a cultivated skill that we can refine, where we can refine our capacity to pay attention. We can become more in touch with our life as it's unfolding, and it's a process with mindfulness. It's something that we can kind of build and learn over time. Next slide. Emotional literacy. Let's talk about what that looks like. Next slide, please. So it's the ability to develop an awareness of one's emotional experience, identify emotions, consider the emotions of others, and effectively communicate needs. I've been really particular about using this language around considering the emotions of others, because a lot of the literature out there around emotional literacy talks about managing others' emotions. And for me, as a therapist, I cannot endorse this idea of setting us up to feel like we need to manage other people's emotions. And we'll talk more about that, but considering the emotions of others. Next slide, please. So, this question around what do you notice when you share your feelings with leadership? You may have ideas around what professionalism looks like. What can I share? And feel free to add to the chat things that might come up for you. What do you notice when you share your feelings with leadership? Next slide. So in terms of emotional literacy, thank you, trust. Okay, thank you, Kelly. You've got to name it to tame it, discomfort. Come on, Rebecca. That comes up too. So you've got to name it to tame it. So next slide. Yeah, some are receptive, but not others are not always. Yeah, yep, that's real. That's all valid. So I wanted us to give an opportunity to look at, depends on the leader, at uncomfortable emotions. And then we should be able to share this in the chat, so that you can see it more closely. So we're looking at uncomfortable emotions. You will notice that I'm using this language around uncomfortable or comfortable, not positive or negative, not good or bad, right? And so let's move on to the next slide. I can show you what the comfortable emotions wheel looks like: accepted, confident, interested, loving. It's also important for us to be aware when we're experiencing those emotions. Next slide, please. So when we look at this emotion wheel, one of the things that we can do, it can help us to identify how we feel and what we need. So we might even start in the middle of the emotion wheel, identifying what's our core emotion. Sometimes that's the emotion that we have the most access to. And then we can kind of branch out into some of the secondary emotions that are right outside of the core emotions in the middle, and see if there's some emotions that align with our experience. And then look at some of the tertiary emotions on the outer rim of the emotion wheel. One of the things that I like to do sometimes is actually look up the definitions. You know, if I'm saying, oh my gosh, I feel really sad, you know, and then I recognize that I'm feeling hurt, I might look that up. What does hurt actually, how is it actually defined, and does that resonate with me? And then to be able to recognize, okay, based on what I know that I believe that I'm feeling, what are my needs right now? Because if I'm feeling hurt, that's going to be really different from what I need if I'm feeling discouraged, right? So being able to engage in this practice of specificity helps us to better understand what we need, and it also helps us to be able to communicate what we need. Does that resonate for folks? You can feel free to add to the chat if it does. And this is just one of the types of tools that can help us to expand our vocabulary. Next slide, please. So this is an opportunity to kind of engage in a body awareness exercise. You know, where in your body do you experience emotions? What we often talk about is that our emotions are a bodily, physical experience. I think we have been socialized in a lot of ways to just mainly intellectualize how we feel. And what we think we feel, if we think it's okay to feel certain things. But let's just take maybe 30 to 60 seconds. Where in your body do you experience emotions? And this is a practice you can do at any time. Closing your eyes, looking in your body. What size, shape are the emotions? What do you see? What does it look like? How do I feel in my body? What sensations does it create? What temperature is it? What's it made out of? You know, are there vibrations, sensations, images? And so this is a way that we can kind of check in with ourselves just to see what we notice. We might notice constriction, we might notice tension, things like that. Next slide, please. Next slide.
Sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulty on my end. I went to the next slide, but it's not reflecting.
Oh,
I'm going to stop sharing and just start resharing again. 1 second, please.
sure, that's fine. We know these things happen, right?
We're just talking about that.
Listen. Right. Thank you. And so I'm also looking at, you know, what are your emotions trying to tell you? That our emotions serve a function for us, you know, depending on our childhood, our upbringing, our own different culture and beliefs. Many of us may have kind of an aversion to uncomfortable emotions, especially anger. But when we look at the function of anger, it can give us a sense of purpose, and it can also help to protect our vulnerability. And there may be certain circumstances where that's an important function. When we're overwhelmed, recognizing when our stresses are overriding our ability to cope. And that can also help us to think about, okay, what do we need based on what I'm feeling? That sense of hopelessness, sometimes we can look at that as if it's an emotion that doesn't really serve a purpose, but it does. It can help us to question, should we keep trying a particular thing? Should I change my course? Sadness, help others know that we need comforting social connection, and to recognize that we're experiencing grief. with a myriad of different circumstances. Anxiety, preparing us to deal with threats, and guilt help us to question if we did something wrong. And sometimes that experience of shame will come up as well, where it's kind of that experience of, am I wrong as a person? And so there are some studies that say that shame is one of those feelings that can help us to kind of adapt or engage with societal norms. But it's also something that we need to look at and how, what function is it serving for us? Next slide, please. Yeah, so looking at feelings on the job. I know a lot of us have talked about how we feel when we do try to express ourselves to leadership. But when we are able to authentically feel our feelings and communicate them in a way that feels, appropriate, we're able to accept ourselves and our fellow colleagues as a whole person, enhance workplace creativity, increase trust. I know that was mentioned before, and authenticity, and have better mental health, productivity, and job satisfaction. Next slide, please. Why do I feel this way? When we do recognize the emotions that come up, what is contributing to that? What's going on for me or for any of us? Next slide, please. A very common cause behind any workplace emotion isn't actually the work, it's who we're working with. Sometimes we can even say to ourselves, the job is fine, but it's like dealing with the workplace dynamics or the politics or, not feeling, right? Come on, Stephanie, not feeling, connected or, yeah, like we belong. I hear you, Rebecca. That's real. That's valid. Yep. Next slide, please. Yes, absolutely, Stephanie. Yep, micro and macro aggressions. And so just looking at the situations that activate intense emotions. First of all, it's because we're human. We are people. Our emotional experiences and our emotional expression is a part of our personhood. It can be reorganization within the company. That can kind of put us in a position where we don't feel safe because we're not sure what's happening or how it's impacting, our role or our livelihood, overthinking, which we'll talk more about, racial stress. We talked, it was mentioned, microaggressions, macroaggressions, this, different, sometimes this experience of feeling oppressed, right, within the systems that we're working in, feeling like we don't always have the space. We can talk more about that for sure. History of trauma, concerns about your children or your family, financial hardship, an urge to people please. Sometimes we're not even considering what our needs are. We're just kind of ready to say yes, ready to work long hours, ready to show up and to, engage in a way that doesn't always benefit our well-being, right? And so that can result in feeling resentment, right? And feeling burnt out and taken advantage of. And even disliking a coworker is a situation that can activate intense emotions. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk about signs of toxic positivity, positive vibes only. It's kind of like there's no room for you to be feeling dissatisfied. So we can find ourselves feeling guilt and shame for feeling angry, sad, and for expressing dissatisfaction. Dismissing difficult feelings of colleagues at the workplace. It could be worse, Yeah, absolutely. I hear you, Chalky. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Covering and masking authentic feelings and concerns, engaging in forced optimism, denying important problems at work. Some of the ways that we can kind of counter toxic positivity is to provide validation, whether it's self-validation or validating others. Consider this underlying belief that we can experience multiple feelings at the same time. Recognize if you're taking, sometimes when people express dissatisfaction at work, if you're in a leadership position, folks can take it personally and feel like it's an attack on them. And so that can also, kind of encourage this idea of, we need to look on the bright side. Right. And so kind of being aware of how that shows up for us. Next slide, please. types of overthinking, right? When we can ruminate about the past, kind of find ourselves thinking about the past, worrying about what could happen in the future, mind reading, which is when we think we know what other people are thinking. We just assume, I saw their facial expression, their tone of voice, I know how they feel. But what we can do with overthinking is kind of take a step back, give some space for curiosity, kind of going into, conversations with a beginner's mind. And also accepting if we are feeling afraid, if we're feeling fear that, well, if this happens, then that could happen. And I'll be, in a situation where I'm, destitute or, at a loss. Absolutely intentionally working on this. Yes, it does cause a lot of stress. It absolutely does. And there are ways for us to develop an awareness of our overthinking, awareness of accepting the fear that we feel, and moving towards this idea of, if I can get this, getting something done is enough, right? As opposed to this perfectionism that can also be a part of overthinking. But the first step is developing an awareness of our kind of propensity to engage in that way of thinking. Next slide, please. Agency. What can we do about what we've noticed and what we've learned about ourselves? Next slide. So looking at our, these are set up in a way to give attention to different mindsets. It is a continuum. We can be in our emotional mind, where it's, our feelings kind of dictate the quality of our thoughts and our behaviors. Another kind of way to talk about that is emotional reasoning. If I feel sad, it's because, I am sad and, my situation will never get any better, right? But with emotional mind, it's more reactive or defensive, impulsive. If we were to give it a temperature, we would say that it's hot, it's often kind of stress activated. Rational mind, it's led by logic. It's more kind of calculating, suppresses emotion. I don't need to feel this. I shouldn't feel this. It's more grounded in kind of just the facts, uses facts and research and planning, strategy. It ignores emotion. And of course, there are times where these ways of thinking are needed and important. But the goal is to kind of move towards or find space for a wise mind, the balance between the rational and emotional mind, the mindset that when we're using our intuition, mindfulness-based skills and wisdom to interpret our thoughts and behaviors. So this is an idea of kind of taking from the emotional mind and rational mind and being able to see the value in both, ways of both mindsets. It's also an opportunity around being present minded. It's kind of what we experience when we're in the moment, when we're present. And it's flexible as well. Next slide, please. So it's an invitation to engage in a mindful approach to communicate our feelings to others. Can start with self-awareness. What am I experiencing? What's coming up for me right now? Taking the opportunity to pause and ground ourselves. Practice selective vulnerability, which looks like being mindful of, how much do I want to share about how I'm feeling? What does the other party need to know, right? And sometimes it might look like, what? I really wasn't feeling well. Yeah, thank you, Robbie, the pause, right? That slowing down, that grounding, it's really important because that kind of puts us in a space where our prefrontal cortex, our executive functioning can kind of go online. When we're at this heightened level of stress, when we're in the fight, flight, or freeze response, it's like the limbic system, the amygdala, and the hippocampus, they kind of take over and they focus on what do we need to do to survive. And it really does kind of take the ability to think clearly, to slow down offline. But when we can pause, it helps our body and mind to know, okay, we're safe. Okay, we don't need to kind of go into, we don't need to activate our stress response. So thank you for mentioning that. And we can use statements like, I feel instead of I am. There's an over-identification that happens when we all use language like, I am sad, I am anxious. It's like, well, no, you're not. You're actually a whole person, right? With all kinds of, internal experiences and values and all of that. So no, you are not sad, but you may feel sad. You may feel anxious. And so, and this other kind of perspective is considering the perspective of the other person. What is happening? What are the limitations of this person's role? What are the limitations of how they, engage, being mindful of that as well. I wanted to just show you this quick TikTok. It says, when you communicate how you're feeling at work and your boss paints you as aggressive. Okay. Let's see. Oh, maybe Marshall.
Y'all are so used to people being indirect that clear, direct communication is deemed aggressive. And I hate that for y'all.
I'm just saying, like you're trying to be direct, trying to express yourself in a clear way. And, you can, folks can kind of maybe paint you as aggressive, as it says. I just thought that was funny and cute. Thank you, Brittany. Next slide, please. Come on.
Y'all are so.
Oh. All right. So just wanting to look at, self-compassion versus self-compassion and kind of the role that plays, in our ability to kind of manage, what we're experiencing. And so this self-compassion is about kind of learning to speak to ourselves like we would speak to a friend. Many of us might find that we can be a lot kinder to our friends, to family, but we're really hard on ourselves. And so looking at these differences, where with self-kindness is this compassion and patience with yourself, even when you make a mistake, disappoint yourself or others, versus self-judgment, when we engage in this negative self-evaluation, this harsh criticism, and we can internalize our mistakes. So that form of self-judgment, it fosters this negative self-talk and low mood. Mindfulness allows us to turn toward our suffering, where we can acknowledge our pain, and it provides an opportunity to develop an awareness of discomfort without over-exaggerating it. Versus the over-identification, where we become so kind of absorbed by our uncomfortable feelings or thoughts, and we get caught up in this kind of reactivity. So we engage in emotional reasoning, and we kind of forfeit the ability to be present-minded because we're just kind of seeing things from this perspective of how we feel and, our own discomfort. And then shared humanity or common humanity, which promotes a sense of interconnectedness, acknowledges that, all humans are flawed. We all make mistakes. We all experience hardships, and we're not alone in our suffering. Versus the isolation, which exacerbates feeling disconnected from others, when we make mistakes or fail. In this state, we have a tendency to become hyper-focused on the self, this inability to acknowledge the suffering of others, because we're so kind of, we're just so insular, in that experience of feeling isolated. And so the idea is kind of moving towards self-kindness, moving towards mindfulness, moving towards common humanity. I would like just have an invitation for us to actually practice a self-compassion break, okay? And this is a practice that can help us to further cultivate our own ability to be self-compassionate. And that's in our next slide. So, right before that one, maybe. Yeah, so you can think of a situation in your life that is difficult, that's causing you stress, not your most kind of difficult situation, but just a situation where, maybe it's a work situation, maybe it's, with family or friends, but it's causing you stress. Just asking you to call that situation to mind and see if you can actually feel the stress and emotional discomfort in your body. I can think of a situation right now for myself. And so in this moment, I invite you to close your eyes, okay, if you feel comfortable with that. And now say to yourself that this is a moment of suffering. That's mindfulness. This is stressful. This hurts. And suffering is a part of life. That's common humanity. Other options might include, other people feel this way. I'm not alone. We all struggle in our lives. I'll ask you to put your hands over your heart. Feel the warmth of your hands, the gentle touch of your hands. Yeah, absolutely. And adopting a soothing touch that feels right for you. And say to yourself, may I be kind to myself. You can also ask yourself, what do I need to hear right now to express kindness to myself? Is there a phrase that speaks to you in your particular situation? Such as, may I give myself the compassion that I need? May I learn to accept myself as I am? May I forgive myself? May I be patient with myself? Just going to encourage you to breathe as well. Take in some breaths. Okay. So this is a practice that you can use at any time of day or night and kind of can help you to access those three components of self-compassion when you need it the most. Yeah, Sharky, absolutely. And be patient with myself. Yeah. So thank you all for just engaging in that practice. You're so welcome. So we're gonna talk about other ways that we can check in with ourselves. Let's move on to the next slide. So ways to check in on the job, right? So while you're at work, you can take a moment just from time to time, just to monitor your own bodily sensations. This is an opportunity for body-centered awareness. Is there tension in your shoulders, your face, hands, or back? Sometimes I'm at work and I notice my shoulders are like up here, and I'm like, okay, let me slow down for a minute, kind of breathe, how am I sitting or standing, right? What's your body language saying? And so this idea of consciously letting go of any tension as best you can. As you inhale and shift your posture to one that expresses balance. Yeah. Yep. Balance, dignity, and alertness. Yeah. Getting a massage. When we check in with ourselves, it helps us know kind of what do we need. So it might direct us to getting a massage sometimes. Next slide, please. And so, just this opportunity to check in. What do you notice in your body? What does support look like in your role? Right. And so being mindful of what support looks like for you. Next slide, please. I'm thinking, just for the sake of time, that we may not do this particular exercise, but I will. But what I will do is we'll make sure that you have the practice so you can see it for yourself, actually. Next slide, please. And so moving into this space of kind of telling yourself that you're safe to feel this emotion, that you're not your emotion, even though you feel uncomfortable, that you are safe. Giving yourself permission to hear the message of this emotion and validate it. And so when you're trying to check in with yourself, observe, bring curiosity to your internal experience. Notice your experience without adding to it or subtracting from it, without amplifying it or pushing it away. Use your senses to gather information, and then try to describe what you are noticing. What are you observing? It might look like, I notice I feel tense. I notice I have thoughts that I'm not good enough when I'm around so-and-so, or when I'm in a meeting, I notice, that my shoulders get tense. So this idea of trying to describe what you're noticing and validating that it's okay to feel this. And that really reminds me of, I was having a conversation with someone and they were just saying that, I don't really feel like I have the right to feel as frustrated as I do, because there's been so much time between the situation that happened and how they were feeling in that moment, and even like, how could I let somebody that I don't even care that much about, cause me to feel such intense feelings. And so there can be this experience of feeling shame and, oh, I feel this is stupid. I shouldn't feel this intensely about this. And, just to kind of remind ourselves that it's okay for us that all of our emotions are valid. When we're feeling that way, we can start to have some curiosity. Okay, well, why is this feeling so intense? What am I thinking about this? And so if we're thinking, oh my gosh, I look like such an idiot. These people are laughing at me. They don't care about me, or I can't do anything right. Having thoughts like that, it really does make sense that we would have these intense emotions. And so to be able to kind of validate our emotions and be curious about what might be contributing to how we feel. Okay. So I'm going to turn it to Marshall. I just want to thank you all so much for just giving me this opportunity to be here with all of you. I promise you, I've been so intentional about cutting things out because there's so much that we could talk about and share and all of that. And you guys have been such a pleasure to be with, and I'm going to, and just thank you for giving me the opportunity. I'm gonna turn it over to Marshall. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Nasia. I'm just going to turn my video on now. So we have about 15 minutes before the end of this session. I'd like to just give people an opportunity to put whatever questions you have in the chat, whatever questions you'd like Nasia to address. I am scanning through now to see if there's any questions that were from earlier in the chat. I believe. Oh yeah, I'm not my emotion will stick with me. That's one of my favorite ones. Whenever we do say I am sad, it really makes it sound like you are sadness itself. But as Nasia did a really great job pointing out, that is not at all the case.
And while people are dropping questions in the chat, I do want to just say thank you to the Source Wellness team. Thank you to Nasia for this incredible, presentation. I think, there's so much going on for all of us, whether it be personal, whether it be societal, whether it be cultural, and it's hard to not bring that stuff into work. And I think even when we look at ERGs, specifically ERG members, a lot of them are also feeling that. So I feel like this session was just super relevant in terms of, ERG leaders creating this safe space for their members to feel their feelings and express those feelings, but also as we go into Mental Health Awareness Month next month, it's just something to keep top of mind. So thank you again to this team. This was really, really awesome.
Thank you. I just stopped sharing my screen. So a few questions are coming in. One says, I loved your slide on toxic positivity. What are some signs of toxic negativity, and how can we and how do we find the balance between those two extremes?
I think that's a really great question. I'm actually also interested in hearing more about toxic negativity. You know, when I hear that, I think about like kind of there's like emotional vampires, or you know, people that kind of suck the, you know, they just suck the positivity out, you know, and it's, you feel drained, right? So I think some of these things are kind of paying attention to what we're noticing in our own bodies, right? When we're experiencing this feeling that kind of says, you're not allowed to express how you feel. Like your feeling is maybe too much for this setting. And so when I think about toxic positivity, I think about that experience where you feel like the space that you're in doesn't have the capacity to hold your distress or your dissatisfaction. And so, you know, we can walk away kind of feeling like, you know, our perspective doesn't matter, or feel like we're not being a team player because we're not sure that we disagree. Maybe we disagree. When I think about toxic negativity, I think about really kind of the frequency, right, of the negative expression of the, you know, discomfort or dissatisfaction. I think about, are we talking about this with the goal to have a resolution, you know, or are we just, Saquana said gossiping, right? Like, I think about the way we kind of distinguish gossiping, but you know, from like, you know, venting is like, gossiping doesn't provide an opportunity for us to come back to the source of the gossip and find a solution. So one example that I think about is in the workplace, you know, just recognizing, you know, wow, this supervisor or this manager I don't really feel supported by this person, you know, and that's frustrating. And, you know, that is causing me to not feel kind of like I'm getting the most out of my job, you know, and this person may have limitations on what they can give me, right? And then when you recognize that, you can either do something about it. You know, you can say, oh, well, I can find supervision with this person. You can say, you know, you can even tell your supervisor, this is kind of what I need in order to feel supported. So, you know, when that balance kind of provides an opportunity to have a conversation about what your needs are. Toxic positivity doesn't give you that, does not provide that opportunity. And neither does toxic negativity. It kind of takes away that opportunity to identify needs and figure out, you know, ways to meet those needs. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah, water coolers. Come on now. Yup. Yeah, who are looking to implement mindfulness. Oh, wow. Yeah, in their group efforts. You know, a lot of times, even with Source Wellness, we will just engage in these 3 kind of intentional, deep breaths at the beginning of every meeting. And what that does is it acknowledges that there's a reason for us to need to take deep breaths. It acknowledges that we may have come into the space feeling some distress, feeling uncomfortable. And it's not kind of this like thing that feels like it's, you know, where you have to like, I don't know, challenge belief systems or values, but it just kind of gives us an opportunity to kind of name what it means to be able to kind of settle and slow down and kind of be in the present moment. So that's one of the things I think about is in a small way, kind of a really efficient way of implementing mindfulness is kind of, you know, having even 3 deep breaths before each session. You know, things like that. You know, sometimes it's even having opportunities to kind of journal at different moments. It's like, you know, and being able to identify what are our needs, you know, what does it mean to be intentional? There's another practice that I sometimes do, which is, I don't know if y'all are familiar with it, but it's a grounding technique, and it's called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And it utilizes our senses. Has anyone heard of that particular technique? Okay, yeah, okay. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's this, what we would do is identify 5 things that we can see. Yep, or you can go the other way, yep. You can identify 5 things that you can see. And so even looking around the room, you know, I might say, oh, I can see the light refracting off of this lamp. And so I wouldn't want to just say, I see a lamp, I see a book, I see a desk. I would want to try to use some descriptive language. So it might be, oh, I see a book that is blue, kind of teal blue at the top and beige at the bottom. You know, that's this book, right? So I might say I can see, you know, a glass of water that has water beads, you know, on the side of it. I might say I can see a yellow acrylic kind of paint. And I might say I can see, you know, outside my window, a tree that has, you know, orange leaves. And so so on and so forth. So 5 things you can see, 4 things that you can touch, you know, 3 things that you can hear. So taking a moment to listen, you know, to what's around you. 2 things that you can smell. Sometimes would grab something, a candle or something like that to smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And so when we do that particular grounding exercise, it actually reminds us that we have the capacity to be in the present moment. And so that's also an exercise. So those 3 deep breaths in the beginning, and then, you know, the sensory based kind of grounding exercise. Yeah. There's so much more, y'all, but you know. Yeah, so that's what it looks like.
There are a couple other questions too. I'm not sure if we've gotten
Oh.
to these, but
So-
one from Rebecca. How do you give feedback in a way that is not emotional?
Ooh, that's a great question, Rebecca. You know, one of the things that I think about is recognizing what our emotions are. You know, what is it that we're feeling before we go into that space, when we can kind of recognize, you know, the emotions, and then being thoughtful about what is it that I want to convey to this person. Are we trying to convey something so they can make us feel better? Or are we conveying information that can help us move towards, you know, a solution or a different perspective? Yeah. Any tips to is that helpful, Rebecca? I just kind of, can let me know.
It is helpful. That's like such a tough question to
Mhm.
ask without like giving detail.
Yeah.
But that was very helpful. It will be the second part, something that I'm currently dealing with. And
Yeah.
like, how do I give this feedback without it
Yeah.
being based in emotion, even though it's wrapped in emotion?
Yeah. And I would wonder too, like, yeah, like what is the emotion? And where, what, why, kind of, I would want to know more about kind of what's contributing to the emotion. You know?
Someone put in here macroaggressions, things like
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
Being left out, you know, receiving feedback in a way that's unhealthy, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
Like
Oh,
that.
for real. That's real. Trust me. I hear you. You know, I think about too, like having like having a diverse support system, right? So it's like I'm feeling microaggressed, you know, by this particular person, They cannot give me the kind of support that I need, but I am going to be able to identify, okay, maybe I can communicate what my boundaries are, or maybe I can communicate, what I can do or what I'm open to doing in that situation, but then, having other spaces where you can go for that validate you, that kind of give you a sense of community, I think about that. I saw something, let's see, some other question. How do you, on tips on how to recognize your emotions when you're caught off guard? Yeah, I think about, a couple things I think about. I don't know, sometimes we just kind of start with recognizing that we've been caught off guard. Like, I didn't expect that, and sometimes it's giving ourselves that opportunity to know that we don't have to respond right away. It's like, wait a minute, I need to process this, and so sometimes it's seeing, do I have that, can I give myself that permission to wait to respond until I feel like I understand more about what I'm, communicating. Okay, yeah. So I know there's a lot of questions.
And I will take note of these. I'll download this chat and just kind of send them over to you. Y'all, this has been awesome. Source Wellness team, Nazia, thank you so much for this time. I will make sure to include the Source Wellness contact information in the follow-up email. So if you're looking to engage them for either like your DEI initiatives or even your ERG specific initiatives, I feel like this would be a great speaker to have, for ERG programming or whatever you're looking to do. So I'll make sure you all have that. And then I'll send her the questions that we didn't get to, just in case she can answer those. But thank you again for your time, y'all. Hope you have a great rest of what is today? Thursday. Have a great rest of your Thursday, y'all. All right.
Oh,
feel free to say something.
Yeah, I know Marshall, has some last kind of words for us.
Oh yeah, thanks, Nasia. So yeah, just reiterating, thank you again to Shezi and the Shezi team for having us here today. Thank you to everyone for engaging in the chat. It really felt incredibly engaging and collaborative, even though we didn't really see faces or have much time to interact person to person, but everyone engaging in the chat was really helpful. And what I'll do is I'll just put my email and Nasia's email in the chat in the meantime. So if anyone does have anything pressing or immediate that they would like to share with us. Also would like to mention that at Source Wellness, we have a lot of other facilitators that cover a lot of other topics, and we have dozens of sessions that are already developed, and we like to make sure that we can customize them based on the needs of our clients or potential clients. So please do reach out. We'd love to communicate with all of you and have an opportunity to see how Source Wellness can help you, help your organization, help your ERG and DEI efforts in general. So thank you everyone for being here, and especially thank you, Nasia, for such a great session.
Thank you.
Awesome. I will close it out. I'll go ahead and stop recording.